Hiya, family. My name is Donna. Some may know me as the lady that says, young man. Today we're doing part 5 of The Science and Fine Art of Fasting by Herbert M Shelton. It was originally written in 1934, but he has updated it in the 1940s, I believe. And right now we're on part 5. And just give me 1 minute while I share this to our Facebook group. So give me a minute, family. Yahuwah, my love. 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 I'm just sharing it to our group family. Yahuwah, my love. 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 Thank you, family. Hi, family. Oh, sorry. That's tonight. I am going. How do I turn this phone off? Give me a second. I'm not good at this. I was singing that the other day, and I figured I'd share it while you're waiting. And sorry about that. So we're part 5, The Science and Fine Art of Fasting by Herbert M Shelton, and we're actually on chapter 6, which is fasting is not starving. So it's definitely not starving. So here we go, family. Fasting is not starving. The word starvation is derived from the Old English steophan, meaning to die. Today, it is used almost wholly to designate death from lack of food. When we mention fasting to the average person, and even the average physician, he immediately pictures himself the dire consequences that he thinks must inevitably result from going for even a few days without food. To him, to fast is to starve, that is, die. This fear of fasting is kept alive by the press, which even so often carries the story of somebody dying while fasting, and invariably death attributed to starvation. These deaths are presented as horrible examples of the evils of fasting. How rare are these deaths? But it would be enlightening if we could have all the details of each of these deaths. No doubt we would find that most of them are not due to abstinence from food at all. Most of these deaths have been due to irreparable damage to some vital organ, organic disease. An occasional one may have been due to pushing the period of abstinence beyond the fasting period. A few have been due to injudicious breaking of the fast. Some of them have been due to drugs, but every day people die from unnecessary and unsuccessful operations, and the press keeps quiet. Every day people die from drugging. Every day. Sorry. Every day people die from drugging and the editors and newsmen ignore such deaths. Fasting is their target. There is no sense in the panicky fear of missing a few meals that is so prevalent in both lay and professional circles today. The fear of starving expressed on every hand is a foolish fear. I am not going to starve to death, says Mr. Average Man when advised to fast. They warn others who are fasting that they will starve to death. Although we oppose letting people starve to death, we make no decided stand against them stuffing themselves to death, instead of rather encourage it. In popular opinion, fasting means starving. Physicians, physiologists, and others of the learned professions habitually employ the two term fasting and starvation synonymously. I am not going to starve, says a long-suffering invalid upon being advised to fast. Those who employ fasting are commonly referred to as starved-to-death doctors. The uninformed physician imagines that the blood and the vital or functioning tissues of the body begin to break down the moment food is withdrawn. That organic destruction sets in immediately, and that every day the fast is prolonged means a greater destruction of the vital tissues. That this idea is false will become apparent presently. In previous chapters, In previous chapters, it was shown that the body at all times has stored within itself reserves of food, sufficient to last for considerable time in the event of scarcity of food or of sickness when food cannot be digested. We saw how the body feeds upon this food reserve and how the vital tissue of the body feed off the least essential, so that even if actual starvation occurs, there is almost no damage to the vital organs. So long as the body's food reserves last, the individual abstaining from food is fasting. When this reserve has been consumed to the point where it is no longer able to sustain the function of life, further abstinence becomes dangerous. Starvation begins. It is only after this point is reached that any real damage, damage is sustained by the vital organs and their functions. As a general rule, under proper conditions of environment, one may fast for weeks and even months before the starvation point is reached. It is perfectly true, says Sinclair, that men have died of starvation in 3 or 4 days, but the starvation existed in their minds. It was fright that killed them. Laboratory workers describe destructive changes in the pancreas, suprarenal glands, and other organs and glands of the body as a result of starvation. But these changes occur after the period of fasting proper has been passed. The vital cells of the organs and glands, those doing the actual physical and chemical work of these organs, do not begin to break down until actual starvation begins. Margulis says, apart from the purely pathological phenomena occurring in the terminal stages, the starvation period of fasting, it should be mentioned that the historical peculiarities appearing in the very beginning of inanition is associated with change in the colloidal condition of the protoplasm and are not at all degenerative in kind. The progressive atrophic changes coincident with inanition are simply due to the gradual withdrawal of metaplasmic inclusions, which represent the nutritive reserves of the cells. The atrophic diminution of both cells and nuclei does not, therefore, present a pathological phenomenon either. Moreover, the morphological process in intonation are not invariably destructive, cell proliferation going on even when the organism has been deprived of nourishment for a long time. This means that, except during the actual starvation period, the wasting of parts during a fast is the result of the using up of those portions of the protoplasm of cells containing the products of their secretions, and not of an actual destruction of the cell proper. The metaplasm is slowly used as the fast progresses, so that the size of the cells and consequently of the organs is gradually reduced. But there is no actual deterioration in structure of the cells, tissues, and organ. Dr. Margulis makes the caution, perhaps overcautious, estimate that a fast which involves a body loss of 10 to 15% is harmless and usually beneficial, and that the danger point in fasting begins when from 25 to 30% has been lost. He has had animals recover normal health after a weight loss of 60%. We have seen the same thing in more than one man and woman. A number of people have died of serious organic disease while fasting, and autopsies have been performed in many of these. In every case, there was still considerable subcutaneous fat, whereas this is always entirely absent where death has been caused by starvation, except in a case or two where the heart was found to be normal in all cases, while in actual starvation, the heart is always contracted or markedly atrophied. The pancreas is little, if at all, affected in death during the fast, whereas in death from starvation, this gland is almost entirely absent. In these cases, the blood was normal in amount with no anemia present, while in starvation, the relative blood volume is reduced and there's usually marked anemia. In starvation, sorry, family. In starvation, the tongue remains coated, the breath offensive, the pulse and the temperature subnormal, and hunger may disappear for days at a time. Death may result at any time, feeding or fasting, due to the failure of some particular vital organ, which is so far destroyed that a fatal ending cannot be prevented by any means. But death from abstinence from food cannot occur until all possible nutritive materials have been exhausted. True starvation begins, says Sinclair, only when the body has been reduced to the skeleton and the viscera. Fortunately, we are not left unprotected and unwarned in this matter. Before the danger point is reached, an imperious demand for food will be made. We say, then, that so long as hunger is lacking, the patient is fasting, but after hunger returns, if he continues to abstain from food, he is starving. Besides the return of hunger, there are other indications that the body is ready to take food, as stated elsewhere. Carrington has well summed up the matter in these words. Fasting is a scientific method of ridding the system of diseased tissues and morbid matter, and is invariably accompanied by beneficial results. Starving is the deprivation of the tissues from nutriment which they require, and is invariably accompanied by disastrous consequences. The whole secret in this fasting commences with the omission of the first meal and ends with the return of natural hunger. While starvation only begins with the return of natural hunger and terminates in death, where the one ends, the other begins. Whereas the latter process wastes the healthy tissues, emaciates the body, and depletes the vitality. The former process merely expels corrupt matter and useless fatty tissue, thereby elevating the energy and eventually restoring the organism that just balanced we term health. Professor Margulis divides what he calls starvation or inanition into 4 periods, each period comprising approximately 1/4 of the total loss in weight sustained at the time of death. The first of these periods of every complete inanition, by complete inanition is meant abstinence from all food until death occurs, is a transition from the condition of adequate feeding to the basal metabolism of fasting. The organism is readjusting itself from the pre-fasting metabolic level to the level of the true physiological minimum characteristics for the particular individual. The division between the next 2 periods is not well marked or defined. They constitute one period divided into early and late phases, and are not very distinct, but merely gradually one into the other. During these 2 periods, physiological activities are at a minimum peculiar to this individual. The length of these 2 periods will be determined by the size of the animal or man or the surplus food reserves on hand. The final or 4th stage of inanition is characterized by the predominance of pathological phenomena caused by the prolonged stringency of nourishment and exhaustion of the tissues. This is the true starvation period and sets in when the body's nutritive stores are practically exhausted. Professor Margulis refers to the whole period from the omission of the first meal until death finally ends the scene as starvation and as fasting. He uses the 2 words synonymously and does not distinguish between fasting and starvation as we do. It will be noted that all pathological phenomena of which we are so frequently warned belong to the 4th stage of inanition, or to the period of starvation, proper as distinct from fasting as we employ these terms. Margulis points out that the morphological changes observable in advanced starvation are practically identical with those generally found in every pathological condition and present nothing peculiar, and suggests that perhaps all pathological changes of tissue are primarily inanition effects. Further, applying his division of starvation into 4 periods, Professor Margulis says, all the scientifically studied fasts of men have been of relatively short duration. In the longest fast of this kind, lasting 40 days, Suchi lost over 25% of his original weight. Judging by the loss of weight, therefore, the experiments or inanition with human subjects have not extended far beyond what may be regarded as the 2nd stage of inanition. Regardless of the length of time of the abstinence, has no deleterious effect whatever upon the subjects because the fasts were invariably discontinued long before the exhaustion stage has been reached. Taking up the study of Levinsen's fast for 31 days, undergone at Carnegie Institute, Margulis says that this fast extended over the first two inundation periods. The first of these periods, lasting 15 days, saw a loss of 10% of Levinsen's weight and represents the transition from the metabolism of the well-nourished condition to that of the fasting condition. By the end of his 31 days fast, Levinsen lost about 20% of his weight. Assuming the maximum loss, he could possibly have survived 40%. Says Margulis, it is clear that the fast could have extended another month before a fatal termination. In other words, the fast was broken at a relatively early stage, if we take into consideration the fact that the second 20% of Levinsen's weight would not have been lost nearly so rapidly as the first 20%. It is very certain that he could have fasted much more than another month before fatal termination. The rule that man or animal can sustain a loss of 40% of his body or its body weight before death results must not be taken too seriously in practice. Sorry, family, just sorry. Obviously, an emaciated man or woman weighing only 90 or 100 pounds cannot afford to lose 40% of his or her weight. On the other hand, a man who ought to weigh about 150 pounds, but who actually weighs 350 pounds, can afford to lose much over 50% of his weight. Exhibition fasters have survived a reduction of body weight of 30% without anything like a total collapse of vital vigor. Within recent years, physiologists have tried to determine how long man can live without food by figuring on a basis of the period of time required for animals, particularly mammals, to starve to death. Their experiments indicate that the period in which death from starvation ensues is proportionate to the cube root of the body weight. A mouse weighing 18 grams dies after 5 or 6 days without food. The corresponding starvation period in man would be 15.6 times as long, or 96.5 to 109 days. A dog weighing 20 kilograms dies in 60 days. The corresponding period for man is 89 days. A cat weighing 21 kilograms can live 18 days without food. The corresponding period for man would be 55 days. A rabbit weighing 24.22 kilograms dies after 26 days. The corresponding period in man would be 79 days. From these figures, Dr. A. Putter, a German physician who has made a study of fasting, concludes that there is nothing in comparative physiology to show that man cannot live from 90 to 100 days without food if he were kept under proper conditions of warmth, rest, fresh air, water, and emotional poise. Sylvester Graham denied that the fat man lives longer or prolonged abstinence from food that does a thin one. He says, if it be designed for the nourishment of the body during protracted fast, etc., then if a very fat man in nourishment of the body during protracted fast, etc., then if a very fat man in the enjoyment of what is ordinarily considered good health, and a lean man in good health be shut up together and condemned to die of starvation, the fat man ought to diminish in weight much more slowly and live considerably longer than the lean man. But directly the contrary to this is true. The lean man will lose in weight much more slowly and live several days longer than the fat man, in spite of all the nourishment which the latter man derived from his adipose deposits. Science of Human Life, pages 193 and 94. Trawl took a similar view, as does Carrington, who says of Graham's statement, I may say that this has been my own experience precisely. The explanation offered is that while the fat person has a large store of fat on his frame, he is deficient in other food requisites. Fatty tissue, these men think, is invariably diseased and deficient tissue. Trawl says, feed a dog on butter, starch, or sugar alone, and you will save in him the consumption of fat, but the dog will die of starvation. He will be plump, round, embonpoint, and yet die of inanition, starvation. He will be, inanition, Alcoholic Controversy, pages 148 and 149. This seems to be what they thought will take place in the fasting fat man. This is a priori conclusion, since the experiment has never been made and it is not borne out by animal experimentation. There is, as I have emphasized elsewhere, a vast difference between a fast and very deficient diet, such as the diets described by Trawl. The ultimate results of the two types of nutrition are very different. Nevertheless, there may be cases of fat individuals who would actually starve to death before a thinner person would do so, for the reason that the nutritive reserves of the fat person may be so unbalanced that he cannot go long without food. I have myself cared for fat men and women who did not fast well and who did not hold up after fasting, as well as do many who are actually skinny. But I have never been sure that in these patients the trouble was not largely, if not wholly, mental. In view of the fat person's love of food and his worrying and fretting when deprived of it, he may actually kill himself, while the thin man is still philosophizing about life and death. If there can be such a thing as unbalanced reserves, and I presume that such may exist, there is as much reason why the thin man, eating the same type of diet as that eaten by the fat man, may have an unbalanced reserve, and there is that the fat man may have this. The greatest losses in the fast, however, are in those very nutritive factors that are more abundant in the diet of many people, while the body clings to the factors that are commonly lacking. The tendency is for nutritive balance to be restored. The fact that the fat man who does not fast well loses all of the difficulties that appear to have come from fasting as soon as he gets his first half a glass of fruit juice indicates that his troubles are mental. Graham's statement that the fat man will lose weight much faster than the thin one is literally true, but what he overlooked is that this rapid loss of weight is not continued. Indeed, we often see fat women who undertake to fast to lose 20 or 25% of the first 2 weeks. but 6 pounds the third week and 2 pounds in the fourth week. The rapid rate of loss does not continue. It should be observed at this point also that some thin people lose rapidly the first few days of their fast. A fast of 100 days or more can be survived even under the most favorable conditions only by the individual who possesses sufficient food reserves to sustain his vital organs and vital functions for this period of time. The smaller the amount of food stores one has in reserve, all things else being equal, the earlier in the starvation period reached. What Margolis classes as the first 3 stages of starvation, we class as the period of fasting, while his 4th period of starvation is classified by us as the starvation period. Fasting begins with the omission of the first meal and ends with the return of natural hunger. Starvation begins with the return of hunger and terminates in death. Fasting is distinctly beneficial. Starvation is distinctly harmful. It is precisely because the average medical man does not distinguish between these 2 major phases of abstinence from food, and because he imagines that the pathology developed under the starvation period belongs also to the fasting period, that he offers his false objection to fasting. It was conclusively demonstrated in the laboratory by Lesarev that the changes in the various organs of the body are definitely related to particular stages of fasting and starvation. Vital organs do not begin to break down as soon as the first meal is omitted. Fasting belongs to that period where there are ample food reserves to maintain vital integrity. The fasting period is therefore determined by the amount of reserves the body has on hand. Starvation sets in after the reserve stores have been sufficiently exhausted that they are no longer adequate to maintain functional and structural integrity. Thousands of fasts ranging from a few days to 3 months in duration in men, old and young and both sexes, in all conditions of life, have demonstrated not only that man can go for long periods without food and not be harmed thereby, but also that he will receive great benefits from a rationally conducted fast. To starve is to die, to fast is to live. This book is 91 years old, family. How crazy is that? Chapter 7, Chemical and Organic Changes During Fasting. Abstinence from food may mean missing 1 meal, or it may mean going without food until death results from starvation. Missing 1 meal produces no organic or chemical changes in the body. In starvation, many changes occur. It is necessary to know that different changes occur at different stages of the period of abstinence, and that the changes at different stages are different, even opposite character. For example, in women and female animals, atrophy of the mammary glands is seen in starvation, but in fasting there is only a loss of fat. In the early stages of abstinence in young guinea pigs, the pancreas, like the other internal organs, is in general more resistant to the loss of weight. Pancreatic losses in the early stages of abstinence are relatively slight, which is advanced stages. That is, in starvation, pancreatic loss, atrophy is extreme, being as a rule relatively greater than that of the entire body. Many examples of similar differences will be given throughout the pages of this book. There is naturally and necessarily a loss of weight when man or animal ceases to eat and if food is abstained from long enough. Death results from two great loss. In discussing the differences between fasting and starving, we made use of Margulis' 3 stages of the inanition period, from the omission of the first meal until its ending in death. In general, in both birds and mammals, the loss of weight is greatest during the first third of the inanition period, least in the second third, and intermediate in the last third. Although this final acceleration of loss is variable or very absent. In all animals, from worms to man, the various organs and tissues of the body differ very greatly in their rate of loss while fasting and starving. In general, it may be said that most of the soft tissues of the body lose weight during a fast, but they lose at varying rates instead of a uniform wasting of the body's resources. Biologically important organs are sustained at the expense of less important ones. Structural changes during fasting are largely those that result from loss of weight. At death from starvation, the amount of weight lost may amount to 50 to 60%. No such losses are registered in a fast. As before pointed out, individual organs or tissues show very unequal emaciation, some living at the expense of others. It will be interesting to note some of those some of the losses and changes which occur during sorry, family. Which occur during the fast. In death by starvation, the following losses have been observed by some investigators. Fat is 91%, muscle 30%, liver 56%, spleen 63%, blood 17%, and nerves is a question mark. Yields physiological gives the estimated loss that occur in death from starvation as fat is 97%, muscle 30%, liver 56%, spleen 63%, blood 17%, and 0 for nerve. According to CHOSAT, the losses sustained by the various tissues in starvation are as follows. Fat 93%, muscles 43%, liver 52%, blood 75%, nerves 2%, pancreas 64%, and spleen 70%. CHOSAT's table was made from animal experimentation and agrees very well with the observation of others, except in the loss of blood. Others have given this as less than 20%. The International Encyclopedia under fasting gives a table showing the losses sustained by an animal while fasting for 13 days. This table gives the loss of blood for this time as 17% and loss of the brain and nerves as none. It will be observed that during the fast, the tissues do not all waste at an equal rate. Those that are not essential are utilized most rapidly. Those least essential less rapidly, and those most essential not at all at first and only slowly at the last. Nature always favors the most vital organs. The fat disappears first, and then the other tissues in the inverse order of their usefulness. The essential tissues obtain their nourishment from the less essential by enzymic action, a process which has been termed autolysis. From these tables, it will be seen that the brain and nervous system continue intact, retain their structural and functional integrity until the last, and retain the inherent power to maintain their nutrition unimpaired, although every other tissue has wasted beyond repair. and that the blood, even in the most extreme cases, does not show extraordinary depletion. Such physiological facts seem to argue that nerve and blood supply throughout the body are vitally normal during a fast, and the human body is, in reality, a veritable organization of assimilable food elements dominated by a self-maintaining intelligence, which is capable of preserving relative structural integrity and physiological functional balance, even when all food is withheld for considerable intervals. Only a very special sense does the body start eating itself when one begins to fast. It never consumes its tissues indiscriminately, but true to its rule of always favoring its most vital organs, it uses up the least useful tissues first. Selective action is exercised from the beginning, and the most rigid economy is exercised in appropriating its food reserves, in sustaining the heart, lungs, brain, nerves, and other vital organs. Even the respiratory muscles are more carefully guarded than the other muscles of the skeleton. The accompanying two diagrams, numbers 1 and 2, are after Voigt. Diagram 1 shows the percentage of the total loss of the body borne by each organ in death by starvation, while diagram 2 shows the percentage of loss in each organ under the same circumstances. These tables also include the proportion which the loss in each bears to the weight of a similar animal killed in good condition. So here we have, it says percentage of total loss borne by each organ, showing the loss of weight of the various organs after death from this starvation. Okay, and down here we have muscles 42.1, fat 26.2, skin 8.7, bones 5.5, liver 4.3, blood 3.6, intestine 2%, kidneys 0.6%, spleen 0.5%, lungs 0.3%, pancreas 0.1%, testes 0.1%, and brain and spinal cord is 0.1, and heart is 0.1 as well. And then the percentage of loss in each organ, showing the loss of weight of the various organs after death from starvation. And here we have, this book isn't cooperating. Sorry, family. Okay, here we go. Fat is 97%, spleen 67%, liver 54%, testes 40%, muscle 31%, blood 27%, kidneys 26%, skin 21%, lungs 18.1%, intestine 18%, pancreas 17%, bones 14%, brain and spinal cord 3%, and heart is 3%. And then it says, the careful student will bear in mind that most of the actual tissue losses shown by these tables occurred in the last third of the inundation period, the period of starvation proper, and do not occur during the fasting period. Man, this book. It's a good one, though. Yes, I did say testes, Robert. Yes, I did. And I was thinking, is that ovaries for women? I'm kidding. While Table 1 shows the musculature of the body supplies of the greatest loss of weight, the actual loss to the muscles only reaches 21% of the total muscular substance, chiefly the superficial muscles, while though the action proportion of weight loss is less, 97% of the fat present is used up. The other organs which lose much of their weight are the spleen with 67%, the liver with 54%, and the testes with 40%. The central nervous tissue and the heart supply only 0.1% of the total loss and 3% of their actual substance. A closer and more detailed view of the losses to the more important organs and tissues will help us to better understand the subjects we are here dealing with. And come on, here we go. And this is blood changes. The blood diminishes in volume in proportion to the decrease in the size of the body, so that the relative blood volume remains practically unchanging during a fast. The quality of the blood is not impaired. Indeed, an actual rejuvenation of the blood may occur. Dr. Rabagliati pointed out that the first effect of the fast is to increase the number of the red blood corpuscles, but if persisted in sufficiently long, decrease them. The increase of erythrocytes during the early part of the fast he regarded as due to improved nutrition resulting from a cessation of overeating. This increase in red blood cells has been repeatedly noted in anemia. The decrease is seen only after the starvation period is reached. Professor Benedict says Senator M. Mueller is reporting the results of their examination of the blood of Kelty and Breithaupt, noted as increase in the red blood corpuscles with both subjects. In a later examination of Suchi's blood by Tozix, the conclusion reached were 1, that after a short period of diminution in the number of red blood corpuscles, there is a slight increase. 2, that the number of white blood corpuscles decrease as the fast progresses. 3, the number of mononuclear corpuscles decrease. 4, the number of eosinophils and polynuclear cells increases. And finally, 5, that the alkalocensis of the blood diminishes. Later experiments agree almost entirely with these results. The Carnegie Institute Bulletin 203, page 156 and 157 says, the results of the above studies of fasting are conspicuous rather from the absence than the presence of striking alterations in the blood picture, and adds the final conclusion as to the efforts of uncomplicated starvation on the blood to be drawn from the results of examination of Levanzin are in an otherwise normal individual whose mental and physical activities are restricted, the blood as a whole is able to withstand the effects of complete abstinence from food for a period of at least 31 days, the length of Levanzin's fast, without displaying any essentially pathological change. Structural and morphological changes do not occur in normal blood cells during a fast. Pashutin records the case of a man who died after 4 months and 12 days, 132 days, without food, and said that 2 days before death, the blood contained 4,849,400 red and 7,852 white corpuscles in 1 cubic millimeter. Professor Stengel says The blood in starvation preserves its corpuscles' richness, surprisingly, even after prolonged abstinence. Fasting for only 1 week will increase the number of red cells in an anemic person. Medical and laboratory experiments have conducted other experiments on healthy men and animals. Hence, they have not been permitted to observe the regeneration effects of fasting upon the blood. Their statement that human blood is relatively resistant during fasting is true, but it does not tell the whole truth. Their statement that there is a tendency to increase in red blood cell count is also true, but even this does not tell the whole truth. Jackson says, during human inundation, the erythrocyte red cells count is often within normal limits, but sometimes increased, especially in total inundation and earlier stages, or decreased, especially in chronic and late stages. In animals, the red cell count appears more frequently increased in the earliest stage of total inundation, often decreasing later. In hibernation, the erythrocyte count is variable. Inundation and malnutrition, page 239. Normal blood contains from 4,500,000 to 5 million and as high as 6 million in healthy young men red cells per cubic millimeter, and 3,000 to 10,500 with a probable average of 5 to 7,000 white cells per cubic millimeter. Dr. Eel's blood was examined June 20th, 1907. The first day of his fast, Dr. P.G. Herford, house physician to Washington University Hospital, St. Louis, it showed the following. Leukocytes, 5,300 per cubic millimeter. Erythrocytes, 4,900,000 per cubic millimeter. Hemoglobin, 90%. A blood test was again made on July 3rd, the 14th day of his fast, by Dr. S.B. Strong, house physician, Cook County Hospital, which showed leukocytes 7,000 per cubic millimeter, erythrocytes 5,528,000 per cubic millimeter, hemoglobin 90%. It will be noted that the blood has materially improved on the fast. A third examination of Dr. Eel's blood, made by Dr. R.A. Jedis of Centralia, 3rd on August the 2nd, showed leukocytes 7,328 per cubic millimeter, erythrocytes 5,870,000 per cubic millimeter, hemoglobin 90%. A further improvement in the condition of his blood is here seen. Sorry, family. This book is not cooperating. Yeah. There we go. Laboratory investigators have reported an increase in the red cells of healthy fasters with a decrease in white cells. In anemia, fasting often results in an increase in the number of red blood cells corpuscles to more than twice their former numbers, with a concomitant decrease in the number of white blood cells. In a talk in Chicago a few years ago, Dr. Tilden said cases of pernicious anemia taken off their food will double their blood count in 1 week. Dr. Weger reports a case of anemia in which a 12 days fast resulted in an increase of the number of red cells from 1,500,000 to 3 million. Hemoglobin increased 50%, and white cells were reduced from 37,000 to 14,000. William H. Hay, MD, in his Health via Diet tells of caring for 101 cases of progressive pernicious anemia during 21 years of fasting, correct diet, and colonic irrigation. Of these 101 cases, he says that eight failed of initial recovery. Part of the recoveries were made permanent by right living. Some of those who relapsed resorted once more to the fast and again recovered. The first 13 cases of progressive pernicious anemia, which Dr. Hay placed upon a fast, recovered in from 2 weeks to longer. The 14th case being in a dying in a dying condition when she arrived, did not recover. Dr. Hayes said the blood during a fast undergoes no visible change as to the cell count unless markedly abnormal when the fast is begun, in which case there is a return to normal. For most of 2 weeks in progressive pernicious anemia, the red erythrocyte count continues to fall before there is a regeneration in the blood-making organs. Then gradually the microscopic picture begins to show round erythrocytes with regular edges. No crenations or irregularities, and soon there is noticeable increase in number of these, with gradual disappearance of the adventitious cells present in the beginning. Not unusually, there is a gain during the succeeding 2 weeks that brings the total back to the normal 5 million erythrocyte count, even though this may have been at or below 1 million in the beginning. Von Norden said, the blood atrophies. This is true of the starvation period, not of fasting proper. Much confusion will be avoided if the student will keep clearly in mind the fact that destructive changes occur only after the exhaustion of the body's reserves. Von Norden, Kallag, and others never tired of detailing the destructive changes that occur in the body during starvation. Indeed, they were right in their details if they had used the term starvation properly, but they believed that the changes seen in starvation belong also to the fasting period. They made no distinction between the two processes. Later, investigators have corrected this old mistake, although few writers on the subject in our encyclopedias and standard works seem to have heard of this fact. The decreased alkalinity due to prolonged fasting is often urged against it. It is contended that fasting produces acidosis. Fasting does not produce acidosis, and the decreased alkalinity is neither great enough, even in the most protracted fast, to result in any disease, unless the frequent case of impotency are to be regarded as due to a loss of vitamins and mineral salts. The blood rapidly regains its normal alkalinity after feeding is resumed and no damage is done. Mr. McFadden says, it has been said that an acid condition of the blood, fluids, and tissues, acidosis, is sometimes brought about by fasting. I cannot concede that this is ever the case in true fasting. As a matter of fact, all the evidence seems to prove that Dr. Haig expressed it. Fasting acts like a dose of alkali. If there is acidity in the system, fasting will remove it and restore the chemical balance of the system. Therapeutic fasting never created acidity, but on the contrary, removes that state when existing. Of course, protracted starvation may do so, But then whoever advised starvation? Sorry. The medical as well as the general idea is that starvation begins practically immediately when meals are discontinued. The impression is that at once the blood and solid structures of the blood begin to break down, that organ destruction has begun. Such is far from the case, as results have proved in scores, thousands of cases. The vital cells of the organs and glands, those doing the active physical and chemical work of these parts, do not begin to disintegrate until actual starvation begins. During a fast, the body lives on its reserves. Starvation does not begin until these reserves are exhausted. What is more, these reserves contain sufficient alkaline reserves to prevent the development of so-called acidosis. Dr. Weger says, varying degrees of acidosis were often in evidence during fasting. These we consider physiological, except in very rare instances the active symptoms of the short duration and easily overcome without interfering with or curtailing the fast. He describes the symptoms of acidosis during a fast as lassitude, headache, leg and backache, irritability, restlessness, redness of the buccal, which is the mouth, mucous membrane and tongue, sometimes drowsiness, and also fruity odor of the breath. These symptoms develop at the beginning of the fast and grow less and less as the fast continues, until they cease altogether. If fasting produces acidosis, the evidence should increase as the fast progresses. I believe that all of these symptoms may be explained without regarding them as evidence of acidosis. They result, I believe, from the withdrawal of the accustomed stimulation, coffee, tea, chocolate, cocoa, alcohol, tobacco, meat, pepper, spices, salt, etc., and are identical with these same symptoms when they developed in the man or woman who gives up coffee or tobacco, but who does not cease to eat. I do not think the fruity odor of the breath can be explained in this manner. However, in thousands of fasts I have conducted, I have never met with such a phenomenon, the breath in all cases being very foul and much like that of the fever patient or like the bad breath most people have, only much intensified. Dr. Weger himself says, fasting is not and cannot be the cause of acidosis, for the symptom complex of acidosis is quite common in full-fed, plethoric individuals, in whom the making of acidosis exists as a result of an overcrowded nutrition. It is true that symptoms of acidosis frequently occur and make patients decidedly uncomfortable during the early stages of the fast. However, these symptoms are due to excessively rapid consumption of the body fat, a catalytic action, and the checking of elimination because of suboxidation. And less than 10% trying to think how many more. In less than 10% of such cases do these discomforts last more than 3 or 4 days. This indicates to us that the acidosis as such was a latent condition that would be excited into activity by any other equally potent provocative. This condition is analogous to a crisis which might occur in the form of an acute disease. The sicker one is made by a fast, the greater the need for it. In general, I agree with these words of Dr. Weger, but I have noted these supposed symptoms of acidosis in cases where there was no rapid breaking down of tissue, and in cases in which physical activity was sufficient to keep up normal oxidation, and in which elimination was normal or supernormal. I do regard these symptoms as being part of a crisis as beneficial in outcome. I have noted repeatedly that the more severe are these symptoms, the more benefit the patient receives from the fast, and the sooner do these benefits manifest. The skin. The exquisite texture and delicate pink color of the skin that develops while fasting attests the rejuvenation the skin undergoes, the clearing up of blotches and blemishes with even the disappearance of finer lines in the skin are particularly significant as showing the benefits the skin derives from a period of physiological rest. That the circulation of the skin is much improved by a period of physiological rest is demonstrated by the way that the blood thoroughly and instantaneously responds to a pinch of the skin. The true pink of color is invariably observed towards the end of the fast and indicates the greatly improved condition of the body. This is to say, the improvement in the skin mirrors the improvement that has taken place within the bones. There is no evidence of any loss of the bones during fast. Indeed, as will be shown in another chapter, they may even continue to grow while fasting. When we observe the marrow of the bones, however, we notice a remarkable change. Marrow is stored up food and readily drawn upon the nourishment when no food is eaten. In starved calves, for example, the marrow is reduced to a watery mass. This amount of change, however, does not occur during an ordinary fast. The teeth. Teeth are specialized bones and are subject to the same laws of nutrition as other bones of the body. In certain quarters, it is claimed that fasting ruins the teeth. The claim is not true, and no one with the knowledge of fasting makes it. No evidence exists that there is any loss to the bones or teeth during a fast. There is an apparent decrease in the amount of organic matter in the teeth of starved rabbits, but the teeth of these animals grow continually throughout life. And Professor Morgulis suggests that this decrease may be due simply to a deficiency of building material. Jackson says, like the skeleton, the teeth appear very resistant to intonation. In total intonation or on water only, the teeth in adults show no appreciable change in weight or structure. There is no truth in the notion that fasting injures the teeth. On the contrary, repeated tests and experiments in the laboratory have shown that the bones and teeth are uninjured by prolonged fasting. I have conducted thousands of fasts, and I have never seen any injury accrue to the teeth therefrom. No one makes a trip to the dentist after a fast who would not have gone there had the fast not been taken. Mr. Pearson records that at the end of his fast, teeth with black cavities became white and clear. All decay seemed to be arrested by the fast, and there was no more toothache. The only effect upon the teeth which I have observed to occur during a fast are improvements. I have seen teeth that were loose in their sockets become firmly fixed while fasting. I have seen diseased gum heal up while fasting, but I have never at any time observed any injurious effects upon the teeth during or after a fast, regardless of the age of the faster and the duration of the fast. This applies only to good teeth. Fasting does sometimes cause fillings to become loose. Although I have always regarded the loosening of fillings in teeth as due to the extraction of the salts of the bad teeth, some of my students have brought up the question, is the loss of the filling due to an effort of nature to dislodge a foreign body preparatory to healing the tooth? This question is worthy of study. The brain, cord, and nerves. The brain and nervous system are supported and lose little or no weight during a fast, while the less important tissues are sacrificed to feed them. They maintain their power and ability to control the functions of the body as well, and even better during the most prolonged fast, as when fed the accustomed amounts of good nourishing food. Relatively to the rest of the body, the brain and nervous system increase as the fast continues due to the fact that little or none of their substances are lost. The spinal cord. The spinal cord loses less than 10% in death by starvation. The brain, nothing. There are almost no structural changes in the brain and cord even in starvation. The brain. In general, says Jackson, the brain appears relatively resistant to the effects of both total and partial inanition. Usually little or no loss in weight or changes in gross or microscopic structure are apparent. In advanced stages of starvation, however, and especially in types of particular inanition, pellagra, involving neural or psychic disturbances, there are well-marked degenerative changes in the nerve cells, inanition and malnutrition, page 173. The kidneys. The losses of the kidneys are insignificant and are usually much less than that of the body as a whole. In the young, the kidneys are even more resistant to loss of weight. The liver. The losses of the liver during a fast are largely water and glycogen. Usually the liver loses more in weight relative to the rest of the body than the other organs, especially in the earlier stages due to their loss of glycogen and fat. The lungs. Jackson says in uncomplicated cases of total inanition or on water only, the lungs are usually normal in appearance. The loss in weight of the lungs in such cases is usually relatively less than that in the body as a whole, though sometimes equal to or even relatively greater than that of the entire body. In the young, the lungs usually appear more resistant to loss in weight, inanition and malnutrition, page 361. That the lungs are greatly benefited by fasting is shown by their recovery from disease, even tuberculosis. During a period of abstinence, shorter fasts are usually required in lung diseases than in disease of other organs, and Carrington thinks that this is due to the fact that lung tissue possesses the inherent power of healing itself in a far shorter time and more effectually than any other organ which may be diseased. The muscles. It has been shown by investigators that the skeletal muscles may lose 40% of their weight, whereas the heart muscles lose only 3% by the time death from starvation is reached. The decrease in the size of the muscles extends also to their cells, which similarly decrease in size. Probably there is not an actual lessening of the number of muscle cells in a fast of ordinary duration, but only the consumption of fat, glycogen, and lastly some of the muscle protein and a lessening of the size of the cells. The loss of fat and muscle might occur at any time without damage to health. In general, the skeletal muscles are affected earlier and more intensely than the smooth muscles. There seems to be no actual decrease in the number of muscle fibers, but only a diminution in the size of their cells. The cells are merely reduced in size but remain perfectly sound. In frogs and salmon, fat is stored in the muscles during the eating period and consumed during the fasting and hibernating period. The decrease in size is due to a loss of fat, not of muscle. Much of the same phenomena are also often observed in fasting patients. The heart. The heart muscle does not diminish appreciably, deriving its sustenance from the less essential tissues. Its rate of pulsion varies greatly, rising and falling as the need of the symptom demands. Studying the respiration rate, Benedict noted various minor fluctuations and arrived at the conclusion that, at least during the first 2 days of the fast, the pulse rate is much more liable to fluctuation than the respiration rate. That fasting benefits the heart is certain from the results obtained in functional and even in organic heart disease during a fast. This arises from 3 chief causes, namely, 1, it removes the constant stimulation of the heart. 2, it takes a heavy load off the heart and permits it to rest. 3, it purifies the blood, thus nourishing the heart with better food. The heart that is pulsating at the rate of 80 times a minute pulsates 115,200 times in 24 hours. Shortly after the fast is instituted, the heart rate decreases, and while it may temporarily go much lower, much below 60 pulsations a minute, it ultimately settles at 60 beats per minute and remain there for the duration of the fast. This is 86,400 pulsations in 24 hours, or 28,800 fewer pulsations each day that it was doing before the fast. This represents a decrease of 25% of the work of the heart. The saving in work is seen not merely in the reduction of the number of pulsations, but also in the vigor of force of the pulsations. It all sums up to a real vacation, a rest for the heart. During this rest, the heart repairs its damaged structures and replenishes its tissues. As shown elsewhere, the heart muscles loses only 3% by the time death occurs from starvation, and in other essential tissues, the loss of this small percent occurs after the exhaustion of the body's nutritive reserves, that is, during the starvation period. This ability of the body to nourish the heart during a prolonged fast is sure guarantee damage to the heart resulting from the fast. Reviewing the chief historical cases of fasting with reference to the pulse beat, Benedict shows that in some cases the pulse remained normal, and in others it rose or fell. As a result of his review of these cases and of his own series of short experimental fasts, he arrived at no definitive conclusion. Carrington says that the heart is invariably strengthened and invigorated by fasting is true beyond a doubt. I take the stand that fasting is the greatest of all strengtheners of weak hearts, being in fact its only rational physiological cure. He attributes the benefits that accrue to the heart while fasting to increased rest, a pure bloodstream, and abstinence of stimulation. The recovery of the heart from serious impairments during a fast, I have had complete and permanent recoveries in what were thought to be incurable organic heart affections, proves that the added rest the fast affords the heart and the general renovations of the body enable it to repair itself. Dr. Ellis says instead of the heart growing weak during a fast, it grows stronger every hour as the load it has been carrying is lessened. High blood pressure is invariably lowered, and this removes a heavy load from the heart. On the 15th day of his fast, friends of Dr. Ellis brought him the new account of the sudden death of a man in Washington, D.C. while on a fast. The papers attributed the death to the fast, and friends of Dr. Bailey's warned him of heart failure, but Dr. Bailey's replied to their warning. The man's death was not caused by the fast. In fact, the fast lengthened his life. For if he had not been fasting, he would undoubtedly have died a week or more earlier. He probably resorted to the fast to save his life, but it was too late. His light was too nearly burned out when he started. How many times do we hear of dying after a full meal when making an after-dinner speech or sitting in their chairs and expiring? That, of course, is regular, but to die when the heart is resting and doing less work than when one is eating, when it is simply worn and run down from overwork, is always attributed to fasting if the person is fasting at the time of death. Of the many thousands who die yearly of heart trouble, a problem not more than 3 or 4 are fasting at the time of their death. In my own practice, one death from heart failure has occurred during a fast. The patient had been greatly overweight for years with high blood pressure, nervous trouble, glaucoma, and gave a history of diabetes. Quite naturally, the failure of the heart was attributed to the fast and the fact that people in her condition die every day from heart failure who have not been fasting, but feeding escapes notion. William J. Bryan, who never fasted, ate a hearty meal, went to bed for an afternoon nap, and never woke up. These things occur daily. The woman was many pounds overweight at death, and there could be no suggestion of starvation in this case. There were ample food reserves left in her body for another 40 to 50 days of fasting. I attribute the collapse of her heart in the above case to fear. The fear was manifest, that the woman had the suggestion of starvation of death dinned her into her ears every day of her fast, and had the suggestion intensified after the heart became affected is certain. Sudden death from fear, shock, etc. are not unknown, nor even uncommon. How many times, asks Dr. Ellis, in discussing the effects of fear in the fast, have we heard of sad news producing prostration or a fit of sickness, a mother's milk becoming poisoned during a fit of anger, causing sickness to her nursing babe, and in some instances even death? Again, he said, I find that so long as the mind is free from worry and fear, there is not a particular particle of danger. It is only when the subconscious mind has suggestions of weakness and fear that the body or any of its organs become weak. The pancreas. Jackson says that in the early stages of inanition in young guinea pigs, the pancreas, like the other viscera, appear in general more resistant to loss in weight, and that the pancreatic losses in the early stages of inanition are relatively slight, while in advanced stages of inanition, the pancreatic atrophy is extreme, being as a rule relatively greater than that of the entire body. He also says upon feeding after inanition, the pancreas recuperates rapidly and is soon restored to normal size and structure. In humans, the pancreas becomes small and firm during inanition. Cases are reported in which the pancreas appeared normal after death by starvation. Other cases are reported with considerable pancreatic destruction. Probably there were other causes than starvation at work in these cases. The spleen. The losses of the spleen during a fast are chiefly water. In starvation resulting in death, the spleen may lose 67% of its total weight. The stomach. A classical example of the way in which fasting permits the stomach to rejuvenate itself is that Dr. Tanner, he suffered for years with dyspepsia before his first fast. Indeed, it was this suffering that followed every meal that caused him to refrain from eating in order to miss the distress. So remarkably did his stomach repair itself during its period of rest that he was able, very foolishly of course, to eat sufficient food in the first 24 hours after breaking the fast to gain 9 pounds and 36 pounds in 8 days, all that I had lost. Although this was a rash procedure, the doctor suffered no apparent ill consequences from it. We cannot approve of such eating following a fast, but cite his example to show what a formerly weakened and dyspeptic stomach can do after a period of fasting. A stomach rejuvenated through rest returns spontaneously to the normal performance of its functions. A weakened dyspeptic stomach resumes normal function after a fast. This alone is sufficient to prove the strengthening results of a fast for the stomach. Both its muscles and its glands are rejuvenated by a period of rest. It is often objected that fasting permits the stomach to collapse and that it so weakens the stomach that it will no longer be able to digest food. Most stomachs are so weakened by the overwork that results from our national habit of overeating that the rest that fasting affords, it is just what the stomach needs most. Fasting provides a rest for the stomach, thus giving it an opportunity to repair itself. Morbid sensibilities are overcome. Digestion is improved. A distended and prolapsed stomach shrinks and tends to resume its normal size. Ulcers heal, inflammation subsides, gastric catarrh is eliminated, and the appetite tends to become normal. Chemistry changes. The chemical changes which occur in the fasting body are as remarkable as anything that we have described previously. It is quite natural that the fasting body loses some of its substances, but it does not lose all of its elements at the same rate. And what is more remarkable, there occurs a redistribution of some of these due to the urgent need for preserving the integrity of the vital organs. The fasting body does not lose its inorganic constituents, minerals, as rapidly as it loses the organic constituents, fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. It hangs on to these precious minerals while throwing away its excess of acid-forming elements. The more valuable the materials, the less of it is lost. The muscles and blood lose relatively much of their mineral. Oh, hold on one second, family. Sorry about that, family. The muscles and blood lose relatively much of their mineral constituents. I know but I forgot where I left off. Sorry. Especially is there a decrease in the percentage of sodium, while considerable mineral substances accumulate in the brain, spleen, and liver. There is then a mere shifting of mineral substances from one part of the body to another, while sulfur and phosphorus diminish in the fasting muscles about as rapidly as do the proteins. There is an increase in the amount of calcium in these organs. These occur an increase in the percentage of potassium in the soft parts of the body taken as a whole during the fast. These facts show that potassium salts and calcium salts are not lost as rapidly as some of the other of the body's elements. The excess of iron that may be contained in the diet is taken to the cells of the liver and stored by these. It is probable that the iron set free by the breaking down of the red cells is also stored in the liver and spleen. At least it is not excreted in any great amount. The body's iron reserves in the form of hemoglobin is relatively large. That the body possesses considerable iron reserve even in pernicious anemia is shown by the great and rapid blood regeneration and great increase of hemoglobin and red blood cells during a fast in these cases. During the fast, the iron liberated by the breaking down of tissues is retained in the body and is not thrown away. Considerable iron and proportionally other necessary elements are consumed during the fast, although the body stores much of its iron in the spleen, liver, marrow, cells, and in the increased number of red blood cells. The fact that enforced fasting in non-hibernating animals produces the same variable results as those produced by abstinence during hibernation show that there is no more danger to the non-hibernating animal than to the hibernating kind. The chief difference is the non-hibernating animal is likely to be more active while fasting, but seldom as active as the Alaskan fur seal bull during the mating season. The hibernating animal is also likely to possess a greater store of reserve food at the outset. Well, that's it. We did two chapters on this today, family, and I'm going to be coming back in about an hour and doing, yes, he knows our heart, but do we know his heart? And we already did Jeremiah. We're finishing up Ezekiel, so probably be starting Isaiah tomorrow. But okay, I'll see you in a little bit, family. I love you guys. Shalom.